Good afternoon. Welcome to Trail Talk. I'm so glad you guys could join us today on this rainy Thursday. What better way to spend a rainy afternoon, right? Yeah. And as promised, our very special guest today is Deana Dickinson McCall. Deana, welcome to Trail Talk.
Well, I'm honored to be here.
Oh,
This
I'm
is
just
a fantastic place.
Oh, thank you so much. She got to come down a little early and spend some time here in the Heritage Center. So she's had her first taste of all of our fun theaters and art and all the things. All the things.
I can certainly see why you've won the awards you've won.
Well, thank you so much. See, I'm telling you guys, it's summertime. Get the kids and come on and see us. We'd love to have you.
Yeah.
Well, you're probably as anxious as I am to get to know Deana a little bit. And so let's go ahead and do that. So Deana, you're a transplanted Okie,
Yes,
aren't you?
I am.
So you're living here in Oklahoma now, but where are you from?
Boy, that one's a little tougher. I was actually, my husband and I both were raised in Northern California. His family came from Oklahoma during the Dust Bowl.
Okay.
They were from up out of the Okmulgee area.
Mhm.
And my dad's family went out during the Dust Bowl from what I would call Central Texas, Abilene area.
Okay.
And I'm actually one of the members of the first generation not to be born in Texas since 1838.
Oh.
So coming to Oklahoma is kind of like coming home,
Right.
you know, as far as the people and the culture and all of that. But we ranched for 22 years in northeastern Nevada, which is very extreme conditions. And way out middle of nowhere, no electricity. We finally got phones the last 10 years we were there. It meant homeschooling or one-room school for elementary education and then boarding the kids out for high school.
Wow. That sounds very remote for the United States. I bet
Yeah.
there are people who are hearing this and thinking, what?
Yeah.
In the United States of America,
Yeah.
there's is it still like that up there?
It is.
Wow.
I've heard the owners now have put up some kind of a solar system as far as that goes, and there's finally better cell coverage. When we got it and not having electricity, I had an old corner of the kitchen where we had a car battery plugged underneath with jumper cables and an old bag phone. And of course, basically it was used, you know, to communicate with folks in town and that sort of thing. But you had to stand in one place. You moved a foot aside, you're going to drop the signal.
Wow.
And so that was.
Okay, so how long have you been, when did you move away from there?
We moved out of there in about 2006 and decided we're going to go to warmer country. And we bought a ranch in New Mexico in the southern Sacramento Mountains. And that was nice because in Nevada, you spend half of the year putting up hay and then the other half throwing it out at the cattle when they're brought home off of BLM range. And New Mexico, your cattle are out year round. And that was so much easier for us, except for it's really, really rough country and high elevation on one end of our permit, and it goes basically from 6,000 foot desert, which I know is hard to relate to here, that it's still dry country, up to aspens. But it was rough enough that I told my husband, we're getting too old for this country, and you couldn't find good help. Right. And so we started looking around.
Hold on a second. I wanna chase some of these things for a minute. So you left Nevada in 2006, and at that time you still did not have electricity. So how far from town did you live?
We were, as my children used to say, 64 miles to a brick of bread.
64 miles.
Yeah.
And so how large was Did you own or lease the ranch?
We owned the ranch.
And how big was it?
Well, the majority of it is like a lot of the ranches further west. It's government land. It's BLM. Grazing land that is attached to your grazing base, which means, you know, you can't sell it, you can't do anything. It's you lease it from the government, but it's still tied to that home base. And by the time we left, I think we had gotten up to 48,000 acres because we were able to take over some adjoining land.
Wow.
So it was a lot of riding.
Wow. And I mean, did you use horses?
Yeah, you have to.
Okay.
And same thing with the New Mexico place. It was too rugged to gather cattle and stuff. You had to be horseback. You could maybe get out in some places and try and take cattle, which you want to do in the mountains particularly, so that they're coming to you. You're not, when they see you, they're not going to run.
Right.
They're going to come to you.
And so how many acres were in New Mexico?
Let's see, that was 10 and 12, roughly 22,000 acres. That was state and Forest Service lease.
Okay, and so you did lease there.
Yeah.
And on those, I mean, this is entirely mind blowing to me. This is kind of foreign to me, actually. So are there, like, how do you go about finding what, like, was there a house built on that 48,000 on that area? Was there a house out there? Did you guys
in Nevada or
in Nevada?
In Nevada, you have deeded land,
Okay.
and which is your headquarters. You know, so you got house, barns, corrals, etc. And because these are tied, they're actually called an allotment.
Okay.
I say lease it, but you pay a minimum a year because that is tied. It takes literally an act of Congress to take that grazing land away from that deeded land. It's, you know, joined that way.
Right.
And in New Mexico, in Nevada, it was, our grazing lease was BLM.
What is BLM?
Bureau of Land Management.
Okay.
That's who we lease
Okay.
from. And they're the ones who pretty much dictate. That place was on a rotational grazing system every 8 weeks that we were out, which means on that grazing, we rotated cattle according to feed. You know, okay, you're done. And they averaged 10,000 acres, those pastures.
Right.
So you gathered those every 6 to 8 weeks, moved your cattle to the next one. And you did that until it was time to come back to the headquarters for winter. And that was generally depended upon snowfall because that country, you saw 20 below every year. And there were weeks when it didn't get above 0. And so it was, you know, it's
right.
It's
You had to have water and everything for those cattle.
Yeah, and you built a lot of fires if they were still out to thaw water or chopping ice if there were springs in that pasture.
Right.
Type deal. So.
And about how many head of cattle?
On that, good years, it would run about 350 mother cows.
Okay.
Then you bring them home in the winter and let them graze. You were irrigating your meadows. They were natural meadows. You irrigated those, let them graze it, and then you started feeding and you fed until usually right around the 1st of May, and then the cattle went back out on the grazing permit until the next one.
And was there different grasses planted on these
the only
areas,
thing planted on the Nevada ranch was crested wheat, and that was a government thing where they came in and planted that, and I don't think it was particularly successful.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Cattle grazing is done,
Right.
you know.
So did you grow up on a ranch?
I did.
Because I'm just thinking, no, someone has to have you have to have a lot of experience to be bold enough to step into a situation like that and believe that you can make it.
Well, as hard as it seems, the ranch I was raised on in Northern California did not have electricity. It was up in the foothills, and the house and the meadows sat in a deep canyon. And there's still not electricity on that ranch to this day.
Wow.
So, you know, growing up with, as my grandparents said, coal oil lamps, we called kerosene, you know, and propane refrigerators, gravity flow water, that kind of thing. That was natural to me until my mother taught school, and if she wasn't teaching school on a rural in a rural area close to a ranch that my folks had, then she would go in the valley, down in the valley, and have a house and teach school down there.
Hmm.
But she was a city girl, so I think about the ranches. I was the baby of the family my folks had before I was born, and I thought, boy, this had to be a change for her.
Right? My goodness. I mean, this is just so interesting. What breed of cattle did you run?
When I was a kid, of course, everything was Hereford. That's all
Right.
everybody ran
Yeah.
was, white-faced cattle.
Mhm.
In Nevada, it was so funny. I'll never forget this. With the first cattle we bought, because you can't take cattle from one area to another. They literally don't know what to eat. They don't know how to survive. So when you move to a different climate, you've got to buy cattle that are climatized to those
Okay,
conditions
that
and
makes
environments.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the first cattle we bought on that Nevada ranch were Longhorn cross heifers
Hmm.
that we bought from a place in Elko, Nevada. And my dad and I were standing there one time. My folks were on that ranch until they moved to town
Oh.
and we bought them out. He was standing there shaking his head. We moved a bunch of cattle and we were closing the gate. And he said, I'm thinking of my granddad. He says he spent his whole life trying to get rid of cattle like this, and here I am buying them.
That's funny. So Longhorn, you're talking about the Longhorn?
Yeah.
It wasn't,
Right, anything, was spotted and had a Longhorn background, it was a big thing when ranchers were able to afford British breeds like Herefords and Shorthorns,
mhm,
Durhams, and bring them in to upgrade their herds.
mhm,
And of course, they couldn't afford it. It was very expensive to have those brought over.
right.
And so they hoped to keep breeding that and get rid of those horns and spots over the
Mhm,
years.
mhm. Isn't that funny?
It was, and I
That
thought
is.
talk about things coming around.
Right, right. Well, the Longhorns are still, fairly popular down here,
Oh, yeah.
but,
We've always had some, and we've also in New Mexico and here, we also own some Corriente cattle and that we lease out for roping.
mhm,
And we did the same there. But I actually, if I had my way, those two breeds, I just think they're hardier. They know how to make a living.
right.
When you're more domesticated cattle don't.
Exactly. The Longhorn, you're talking about the,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Yes, well, we teach about the Chisholm Trail
yeah,
and the Longhorn, they have all these adaptations that just make them so hardy. They
Yeah.
can live almost anywhere
that's right.
and can withstand their disease-resistant cattle and just, there's all kinds of really good things about them. But they're probably not naturally, that the original Longhorn
Yeah.
was probably not quite as
No,
big bodied, they're a leaner breed. And so if it's all about making money for the meat, as it becomes more competitive, then those other breeds are gonna be.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So in New Mexico, then, was it the same? You left your cattle?
Yeah,
Up
they don't have
north.
to, yeah, right. We sold everything and we bought cattle in New Mexico. And stocked that place. At one point, we tried to have Angus cross cattle on our state lease. That was a lot easier, gentler ground.
Mhm.
And then the Forest Service is what they would call a horseback permit,
Mhm.
horseback allotment. And because you just couldn't do much. And some of it, we had a 13-mile pipeline that you couldn't even go on horseback the whole way. You had to go on foot. It was that bad and that steep.
Oh, wow.
So we ran Corriente and a few Longhorn cattle there, but we gradually started crossbreeding them so that the cattle could go on either place.
So your kids grew up, did you guys have cowhands working with you on either of these
When it's
places?
Brandon time and that sort of thing, neighbors come to help. And of course, as our kids grew up, I have twin daughters. Their husbands would come out, and help if you were doing a bigger work. But most of the time it was my husband and myself, and then the kids, as they were growing up. They all grew up horseback pretty much.
Oh, I bet they did. I bet they did. So like, as a mom, how do you socialize your kids? Well, you know, when you're often remote like that, what do you do for that
Well,
part of their lives?
One thing that we did with the girls, and they were the oldest, and 10 years later, we had a son as well. We would, okay, so these kids aren't sick of riding. Get really good on this horse. We're gonna ride, you know, and they'd have to ride miles and miles and miles because there's no babysitters.
Right.
You know,
Right.
that's what you've got to do, and you can't leave them 13 miles away
Mm-hmm.
by themselves and at a house. Okay, you know, you get really good doing this, we'll take you to junior rodeo. So we use that as an incentive to, you want to keep riding and this can be fun, not just all work. Let's practice this. And then they got to see other kids.
Right. Well, that's a very, yeah.
And 4-H, you know, those, we started a 4-H club. We had a very small, little church out there. So a handful of other kids, you know, they got to have Sunday school with and community things. When the further out you are, I think the more important that is.
Right. Well, yes, exactly. That's what I was thinking. Like you said that your daughters are married and I'm thinking, how did they meet young
College.
men? Okay. All right.
But I mean, you know, they dated in high school and we always laughed and said, well, we won't have to worry about, you know, boys and stuff. No, that was wrong. They'd meet kids from 4-H or FFA. And I remember one night a boy drove from Elko, which was 100 miles away. And he was actually on a ranch outside of Elko, so it was further than that. He drove all the way out, picked her up. They went back into Elko for the prom and brought her home that night.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Oh,
so the thoughts of don't have to worry about it went out the window.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a will, there's a way. That's so funny. So when you guys moved down to New Mexico, were your kids grown?
Oh, yeah.
And gone?
Except, I had a 20-year-old son who was going to school up in Idaho in college. And he came down to help us after we moved. We lost him when he was 27.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
He had right before his 21st birthday, he was diagnosed with a really rare disease. And he actually made it 2 years longer than that. But he was a really good kid and he loved ranch life. I always laughed on my 3 kids. One of my daughters, I said, was a roper. The other one was a horsewoman and the boy was a cowman.
That's the way.
Yeah, that was the personalities. So, but New Mexico was good to us. Now you just get to a certain point of, okay, my husband had a couple of bad horse wrecks and I knew next time, okay, this one or the other, and it's just too dang remote. We need to not be doing this.
Right. So you downsized and moved to Oklahoma.
Yeah. First time, and the last winter was the first time since we've been married, we did not have cattle to take care of in the winter.
Wow.
We ran some stockers and got rid of them in the winters. So.
Yeah. Even though the winters around here are not.
No,
they're nothing.
No, nothing
nothing
compared to that.
Yeah. So you guys have land out there?
Yeah, not a very big place. This year we're running some stockers and some older pairs with you'd call short-term cattle that we'll get rid of. Yeah. You know, this winter. So just something so that we still look out the window and see cows and horses and
exactly. And I guess you have electricity now?
Oh yeah.
Indoor plumbing, all that.
Yeah.
Wow, it's like you came to big time whenever you came to Oklahoma.
People said in New Mexico, gosh, this place is out. And I said, oh no, I've got power. I've got
Right, yeah.
Water's not coming off a windmill down gravity flow. This is good.
This is good. So you had electricity in New Mexico?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
we did.
So how was that different? I mean, it's rare to talk to someone who has lived without electricity. So what was that like where you had
no electricity?
And then, and going to where you.
Well, you know, I had it growing. I had it at mom's places down. And after they sold the ranch I was raised on, you know, we had electricity and all of that. And I know it was not as hard an adaptation for me as it was probably for a lot of people. But growing up with and having grandparents, I think, heavily involved and old timers with the old time ways, it was fairly easy for me to step back because all I had to do was think about, okay, when I was a kid, what do we do for this? How did Granny make this without, you know, and we'd always laugh. We didn't even have a generator in Nevada for several years. And then we finally got a generator. And we'd run in the evenings and I would wash clothes in the evenings, but.
Oh, I
so
hadn't even
many-
thought about having to do laundry.
Oh, yeah,
My goodness.
yeah, and, you know, the first few holidays, got out the old rotary beater for making the whipped cream and it hung up and we ended up using forks, you know, but I made bread every other day besides, you know, because you have to, you live that far out.
Right. It's not like, oh, we're out of toilet paper, gotta run down and get some.
If you forgot
Oops,
something in
ran out of
town,
milk.
you learned to be the queen of substitutes, I'll tell you.
I bet you did. Wow, that is something. That is really, and that's amazing. So how do you think your kids felt about that?
You know, I tell them, you're probably some of the last generations and, you know, they're in their forties, you know, to have experienced the lifestyle that you did.
For sure. I mean,
Yeah,
that's just, it would be unheard of.
yeah.
Wow.
It was.
I love it. I love just realizing that there are places where you can literally be away from everything.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure it was so wonderfully quiet and just this night sky filled with stars and just, wow, that's amazing. Well, you made it to Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Now you have, I don't know, when did you start writing? Have you always been a writer or?
I've always, probably more properly to say, I've always been a rhymer.
A rhymer, okay.
That
I like that.
came naturally. When I was very little and mom was off teaching school and my dad moved my grandparents up to the ranch to help him. He had 2 or 3 ranches going at the time. And I would spend a lot of time with my granny. And so as part of the entertainment, she made everything rhyme we were doing. And a bunch of the old sayings. So, you know, she would sit, or we'd be doing things in the kitchen or sitting out on the porch. But evenings also were spent on the ranch I grew up on, out on the porch. And we had a hired hand there as well. That was my granddad and hired hand, my folks and, you know, siblings and I. And evenings were spent old cowboy songs, stories, poems, and that kind of thing. So when they held the first cowboy poetry gathering, I was like, really, other people do this? And that was kind of a shock to me to find out. And then the explosion it hit several years later that people came out of the woodwork because nobody knew anybody else did that.
And then all of a sudden there's like.
Kind of like coming out of the cowboy poetry closet.
Yeah, exactly. Finding your people.
Yeah.
You found your people out there. That is amazing. Well, probably, I mean, like how many years ago would you say that kind of happened?
Well, I think, and there's this disagreement on the first actual gathering, but roughly 1985.
Wow.
And, you know, I'll be going to Elko this year. It's the National Cowboy Poetry Gathering. I did not perform the first year. I was pregnant, didn't want to get up in front of everybody. And, but I think the second year, one of my daughters did. And at one point, all of my family performed.
Really?
Yeah. And my husband got out of it. I think he was the first one. And then the kids gradually, my son stayed with it for a long time. And he did a lot of poems and he did some writing too, but now one of my daughters is going back into it.
Oh, really?
And she's starting to recite again. So her kids are gone. She's got an empty house and she's decided I'm going to go back and start doing this. So
Well,
I'm excited about that.
Oh, that is very fun. Very fun. So, about how many of those big events do you think happen annually?
Probably the three biggest, of course, is the National Cowboy Poetry Gathering in Elko, Nevada.
Okay.
The next is the one, it was called the Texas Cowboy Poetry Gathering for years. It's changed hands and it's called the Lone Star Cowboy Poetry Gathering, and it's in Alpine, Texas. And it very much prides itself in having not just poets, but poets who have that background, who literally know which end of a cow gets up first.
Like their stories are firsthand.
There,
I
and
call
you
them
know, when you're
stories.
listening
The
to
poet-
people,
The
you know,
poetry, yes, and the
Yes.
poetry tells a story to me, the
Yes.
ones that I've
Yeah.
heard. And so you can tell that that's their experience. They're
Yes.
telling something they,
yeah, and then Prescott, Arizona.
okay.
Those are the largest ones, and I don't travel near as much, and I'm slowing down even more. There used to be a lot more gatherings too, as well. I did go down to Waxahachie, Texas this year.
Mhm.
It's their second year, and I wanted, they asked me, and I want to help them keep it. It's really
Right.
tough to keep these gatherings going and to have the money
Mhm.
to put them on and that kind of thing. And then I also wanted to go because my granny's family was from outside of that area, and I got to go do a little research and go to family cemeteries and stuff while I was there. So
Well, that was icing on the cake,
Yeah.
wasn't it? That's
It was.
nice. That's nice to get to do that. So, you've been performing then since 1980
yeah, the
something?
late 80s.
The late
basically.
80s?
Yeah,
Wow.
it's a
Wow.
long time.
That's, I mean, it is a long time, but it's also so, that's a beautiful thing to me because when we were chatting earlier about, keeping the cowboy culture, the Western culture and all of that alive.
Yeah.
That's one thing that cowboy poetry does. And if it's been if these events have been happening for 40 years, that's 40 years of history.
Yeah.
That have been put into this form, this metered form,
Right.
format, and what a great way to keep all of that intact.
It is. And there's free verse, there's blank verse out there now.
Mhm.
They've, really broadened. Sometimes there's essay sessions as well. When you attend these events, usually there's you have your choice of which ones you're going to go to during that time.
Mhm.
And then at night they have big shows as well.
Mm. Well, there's a man named Wallace Moore from Lawton, and he's kind of a historical interpreter, but he's also does some poetry, and his is more, I don't know, maybe free verse kind of,
Right.
His, he doesn't have like the basic metered
Mhm.
verses, but, it's that story.
Yeah.
It's the story that you just hang on every word. That I love. Jay has been here. He's such a friend of the Heritage Center, and he's been on Trail Talk numerous times. And I love his.
His great.
Yeah.
Jay's poetry is
Mhm.
is great. He, if he and I are at a session or at a gathering together, and we always try to go in and hear Jay, there's certain people that you do.
Mhm.
And his poetry is great. It rings true.
Mhm.
It tells the story, and he's a great example of what a poet should be.
Right. And his, sometimes you can get kind of emotional.
Oh, yeah.
His delivery packs that little
Yeah.
punch with it on a lot. Sometimes they're such a sweet story that he tells. He also, recommended a man named Strawberry.
Yes,
Do you know him?
I know Straw. Yep.
He told some of the funniest, or I guess, what was the word you said? Your daughter was going to start reciting.
Reciting.
He
yeah.
recited, I want to use the right word. He recited, a one about, it makes my eyes water laughing about, one was about like, turkeys, like they had a turkey ranch and,
Oh, yes.
you know, a story about
I know which one you're
herding
talking.
turkeys, and then another one about a steer got loose in town and it was Christmas time, and I don't know. Anyway, his are just very funny,
Yeah.
you know? So there are all kinds of, I don't know, ways of telling the story. If you
Right.
want it to be humorous, or you want it to be serious, or
Right.
you want it to, you know, pull at a heartstring, or you just, you know, there are so many different ways that the poems can just catch people,
Yes,
I think.
I agree.
And how many poems do you think you've written over the years?
I couldn't even guess. And you know, we hold these concerts at our house. We have a building for it and this kind of thing. And I had a musician come in from Albuquerque, New Mexico. He and I also been writing songs.
Okay.
And so he actually helped me produce the last poetry album I did. And we won a Wrangler Award. That was the first time I came to Oklahoma, was up there for the awards, and that was incredulous.
The
yes.
Cowboy, what is it called?
Used to be the National Hall of Fame. Now it's National Western Heritage and Cowboy Hall of Museum, something on the, yeah.
You guys know the old Cowboy Hall of Fame in Oklahoma City, formerly known as, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, when they called me, I thought it was a joke. When I said, yeah, right, you know, who is this? No, ma'am. And I was like, oh my gosh, you know, I never dreamed. Well, for one thing, as far as I know, it is the only cowboy poetry album ever awarded one.
Really?
Yeah. And so that was the other thing. I was like, and we did it. And I had the two musicians, Randy Houston and Jim Jones, playing background music behind the poetry. But so
do you sing it, or
no,
do you recite it?
I recite
with the music in the background. I bet it's beautiful.
And
wow. So is that something people can purchase?
Yeah, they can.
From like your website? Or,
website or Facebook.
We'll get all that information on here before we get off the interview.
But I'd never even dreamed of, you know, something like that. Right. And then a few years later, Jim and I wrote a song, and by gosh, if it didn't win.
Really?
Yeah.
You two kind of have a little thing then, don't you?
Yeah, so.
One of those writing partners that it just flows. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That is so great. So, you've also written books, or are they poetry books?
I have, the first book I wrote was actually, it was poetry and short stories. Mustang Spring. And then I wrote, it did pretty well. I won a few awards, and the judges at Women Writing the West, what are you going to write next? And I said, I'm not sure. And they said, well, we sure like those short stories about women. And I had done, some of them were contemporary times. Some were pioneer times, the short stories. So I did the next one, I called it Rough Patches, and I did really well on it. And they said, continue these women's stories, please, in another book. We want to know what happens to them. So I wrote Rough Patches too. The second, you know, the sequel to it. And then the next book, there's a New Mexico woman artist who does paintings that are, I think, fantastic, of family ranch life. And she contacted me, and to make a long story short, she said, I want to do a book with you. she says, your poetry and my paintings.
Mhm.
And I thought, oh, this will be really, really cool.
Right.
You know, she'll look at poems and paint. No, I wasn't, it was the opposite.
You looked at paintings and
And
wrote
wrote poems, and
Oh.
75 of them, and we got it done in 18 months.
Wow.
And it was uncanny, some of it. She says, I'm so glad I chose you. She says, I can't believe it. She would email me a photo of a painting, and then I would write a poem to it. And she says, you know, especially on some portrait ones, how did you know that this woman had been through a divorce, that all these things had happened, you
Right.
know? And I said, because your painting's so good, I can see it.
Mhm.
Type deal. And we did really well.
What a
with that.
collaboration. And is that the one you said is kind of a coffee table?
It is,
book?
and it's called Split Reins. Yeah.
Split Reins.
We decided that was a great title, with the poetry on one side, the paintings on the other, and also it's, you know, part of the culture of the Southwest to ride with split reins. So we thought that's a great title for it.
Oh, very nice. And so, wow, I am just, did you fancy yourself a storyteller? Did you used to make up stories for your kids and?
Not much
tell
for the
them?
kids, but you know, I repeated old stories, and the storytelling has, my granddad was a storyteller. He could keep you spellbound with his stories.
So you learned,
Yeah.
sitting at your grandpa's
You
feet,
said
probably listening.
yes, you do. You learn by listening, you know. Well, and back to the books after this, if you really think COVID hit.
Oh,
And I
right.
have a really great friend that lives in Pauls Valley here. And she had said, we need to do a cookbook. We need to do a cookbook on ranch cooking. So I said, you know what? This is probably a great time. I don't have any other projects. COVID's going on. And so we did a cookbook. And so that was my next one. It's called Cowboy Cuisine Beyond Biscuits and Beans.
Wow.
And it's got little stories about the recipes and so on. And then the last one I tackled, and it was a really hard one to write, and I'm still not really happy with how it came out. But I told it's called The Okies' Daughters. It's the second generation of what was termed California Okies growing up there. And of course, a lot of it was experiences I had, friends had, that sort of thing. And because in California Okie, you don't have to be from Oklahoma, you can be from Texas or Arkansas or even eastern New Mexico.
If your family moved there during the Depression.
You got it.
Yeah.
And so
that term, even though now being an Okie, we love that. Those of us who live here in Oklahoma. But it was a very derogatory term at one time.
It was very much so. And what was in California, there were places particularly, and I was raised up north, but my sisters were born in Fresno or Bakersfield or that kind of thing. That was kind of the hotbed where so many ended up. There are so many small rural California towns when I was growing up. If you shut your eyes and turned around, you did not know you were not in a small town of Oklahoma or Texas.
Just listening to folks.
Oh, yeah.
Talk.
And as I think happens anytime there is a culture, if people are removed from it, they hang on to it more. And it's actually stronger there, the old ways, than where they came from. And
very interesting.
And I wanted to bring that out to people, for people who were not aware. And many of us were not aware until we went like big competitions, went down Southern California or these places. Oh yeah, there's a bunch of Okies up here from Cottonwood or Red Bluff or wherever you were from. And we didn't realize the words we used of people. Like, where are you from?
That is, wow. I mean, you know, I've just been born and raised here in Oklahoma. So thinking about Oklahoma words
Yeah.
or,
Expression.
expressions, things
Yeah.
like that being used somewhere else
Yeah,
and making that connection with another person.
right.
Wow. That's-
Like, I don't know if it's Texas or Oklahoma because so many of the lines are blurred when you get in areas.
Mhm.
Oh, and I never thought anything about it as a kid, but somebody was always fixing to do so.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, they will fix. What do you mean you're fixing to
Yeah.
do something? Yeah. That was one, and I will never forget, I was in kindergarten. And I got, basically, the teacher got after me, well, you have to know what a siren is. I'd only heard of it as a siren.
It's siren. Yep. Speaking a foreign language to me.
Yeah, and so,
Oh, that's really funny.
Yeah.
That is very funny. Well, I know you brought some poems with you. I'm gonna check kind of how we're doing here. Oh, we're great. So, let's just take a little break from,
Okay.
talking for a minute, and would you share one of your
Sure.
poems? I mean, y'all, she brought a nice
I
big
wasn't sure where we were going.
selection. Well, I love it that you brought a variety of pieces so we can, hear just a few different things. We've talked about all sorts of things today, so.
Right. This poem, and in fact, they videoed it at the National Cowboy Poetry Gathering when I did it. I actually wrote it. There is an association called the International Western Music Association. It includes poetry. And there was a very famous woman poet, and as you can imagine, when cowboy poetry started again, so to speak, the interest and all in the 80s, women were, of course, a huge minority.
Oh, right.
It's probably 90% men.
Yeah.
Well, there was this gal, and she and I became friends. She was in her 80s. Her name was Georgie Sicking, and her life story was I wish she was still here.
Mm-hmm.
The stuff she went through, and never ever considered herself a cowgirl. She was a cowboy, and married,
Interesting.
raised kids,
Uh-huh.
and everything really the hard way.
Mm-hmm.
She and a sibling, when her dad remarried, left them in a cabin in Arizona to fend for themselves at like 7 and 8 years old. He'd come back every few months. That'll give you an idea. That was the start of her life. But in her honor, they asked poets, please write something that would fit Georgie
Mhm.
and what she stood for.
Mhm.
And I thought, and I rarely do something like that. And so, and they actually gave away a pair of spurs as the award
Mhm.
that have a GS on them.
Uh-huh.
And I wrote this one, and her family chose the poet. They didn't know who wrote what,
Mhm.
but the family chose this, and it's called Cow Country Code.
Cow Country Code. All right. Hey, Mary, you want to zoom in? Yeah. Yeah. Let's. Very blurred. Just a second. Oh, whoa, you went.
Ooh, there it goes.
No.
That's after the fact. Can't watch that. Watch it here. That's delayed. Here we go. Okay. Let me see what it was.
There we go.
That's better.
Yeah, we're late. Sorry.
I listen carefully, listen to directions, all based on recollections of cattle last seen, water and grass green. His face was lined from a lifetime, counting every nickel and dime, worries and cares, hopes and prayers. He'd outlived his child, outlived his wife, seemed to have tired of life. After the stroke, spirit and body broke. Drought had fallen heavy on the land, grass replaced by piles of sand, tanks lay long dry under a blazing sky. We prowled around, prowled for his cows, swore to ourselves renewed vows of helping neighbors, our free labor. But we faced mortality, faced our own years, and sought to appease our fears of growing old and outfits sold. Cattle were gathered and sorted, numbers tallied and reported. We figured the amount he was given to count. It would be enough, it'd buy a place in town to watch the sun go down on a quiet street with memories bittersweet. His old hand shook as the paper curled that gave a dollar amount to his world. He took our word, couldn't really see the herd. That tally he held with quiet pride, was one time we all lied. His cattle were thin, rough and open, hadn't calved like we were hoping. So we added a few, ours, and he never knew. It was our raising, raised to do right. In the old days of black and white, no question of gray, just one right way. We rode hard and long that day, for something more valued than pay. A time on the code, for that we rode.
That was great. Wow, I can see why her family loved that so much. I'm coming back, y'all.
So you wrote that
Yeah.
entirely based on what you knew
Yeah.
of Georgie?
Good. Well,
Of,
not so much of her, but what we hope is the best, that old code that people should adhere to,
exactly, right.
whether
Yeah.
they do or not. Yeah.
And so what did the family say what they loved the most about her? That
They
it
just said
embodied
that's,
her?
that was the way Georgie ran. Actually, that's the way her life was. Those were her values. That was right from wrong, and that's what she did.
You know, it's funny, here at the museum, we do we call it the Cowboy and Cowgirl Code of Conduct. And it's just something we talk about with the kids, you know, but it's just so many of those practical things that you should always do, you know, do your best and always, you know, stay clean in thought, word, and deed, you know, and I mean, just, I don't know, just so many things that.
Yeah, to have those values, but I didn't want it so much that it's so good, so perfect, you know, where I brought in, which would be very typical. Yeah, we got to go do this. We're riding for free. I got better things to do. You know, here we are doing this, which is very much a part of life. It's reality.
Right, right. That's exactly.
You know, you're grudgingly helping at times.
Yeah, yes. I don't want to have to do this, but yeah.
But it's the right thing to do.
It's the right thing to do. I won't be able to sleep right if I don't do it.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, what do you find to be your best inspiration? Like on your best stories or your best poems?
Oh boy, that one's tough. Sometimes, you know, things come to you and sometimes they don't. I can't tell you how many things I've started and thrown away.
Oh, really?
Yeah, one of the hardest things for me learning to write was learning to walk away and coming back. You know, I'll have people say, man, I wrote this poem. It took me 5 minutes. And you always kind of have to think, well, that's pretty good, but you need to go back. It could be so much better. And it took me forever to learn that lesson.
That.
Let it set and you go back and you may go back several times.
So how do you know when to stop?
You know, I don't know there is. Waddy Mitchell and I were talking about this one time, and he's probably today, since Baxter Black has passed away, you know, the most popular, well-known cowboy poet. And he laughed and I said something about a poem I did, and I said, yeah, I changed 2 words of that. It hit me one day. I've been doing it for 20 years. And he says, I do the same.
Really?
He says, it hits me, why, that word's so much better, that needs to be there. And so you will, or you'll realize, oh, this would sound so much better coming after or before where it is.
Well, and when you're reciting your own works, you
Yeah.
have that liberty to be able to do that.
Yep.
And so do you think, do most poets, cowboy poets, do they write their own?
There's a mixture, you know, originally when people first came out of the closet, as we said.
Yeah.
So many of them were traditional, and my kids all did traditional. They started writing when they got into high school, but old ones, you know, and some of the old songs, a lot of the old cowboy songs started out as poems. And then were put to music, because when something's put to music, it's actually easier to remember.
Yeah.
And so that was a way of preserving those, and they very often would do old poems, and some of them that, you know, some very elderly person say, I haven't heard that in 60 years.
Oh.
And
Wow.
they learned some from my dad, you know, who in turn had learned them from his father.
So were there gatherings in their day?
No.
No.
No such thing. I mean, the closest thing was recitations in school. Remember when everybody had to learn a poem and get up and do that? Now there was, you know, it was actually, I guess, recreation after work. When they all got to sit down and of course, if they had a good story to tell, if they could tell it in rhyme, it was more likely to be remembered.
Yes. Yeah. That's very interesting, kind of that history. So if someone wanted to go to Elko, Nevada and be, you know, just go up to, not necessarily participate, but just be in the audience. What, like if I went up there, what would I expect? What could I expect? What would be there? What would be happening?
You might be overwhelmed, honestly. For a while, the number of people attending that gathering is still a huge amount. I don't know how many thousands, but I know one year they said 25,000 were there on one day. But
wow, that's the population of Duncan.
Yeah, and it got up where it was really too much. I have a center, convention center, you know, and you have your lobby area with meeting rooms off, and the meeting rooms were used for sessions, and then in the big theater, there would be a show coming out. But they released those doors and you couldn't move. Everybody's trying to, and it was inching steps.
Right.
And so they had to start going to other venues. And well, we're gonna go over to the junior college and have these shows while these are going on here. And they were eventually able to buy this old historical bar and put a theater in it, type deal. And Lone Star Gathering is held on Sol Ross campus.
Oh.
And we get to use a lot of the different buildings and their theaters for it.
Wow, so you have to, there must be quite an, you know, order of events and.
Oh, yeah, and you've got to choose, actually, you're given a program and it'll say, Jay Snyder, me, 3 or 4 other people in this show. You'll have 4 or 5 performers in this one. And there are 5 or 6 sessions all going out at the same time, and you've got to choose who you're going to go see.
As a performer then, how many poems, is this a multi-day event? So
There's sometimes I have to go with 30, no, 30 already. And I've gotten where I keep notes instead of standing up there and forgetting. Or, well, that one's not gonna happen, I want to go to another one, you know, type deal. And I know was the most nerve-wracking performance though I ever made was at the Cowboy deal in OKC. Because generally, when I called the guys and I said something about performing, and oh, no, you don't perform, and I said, read the letter again, and we had to. And that year, it was really hard. They were inducting Reba McIntyre's dad into the Hall of Fame. And so I had she and Kevin Costner and everybody else on right below me and had to perform for all of them and a teleprompter, and I hate teleprompters. I discovered they messed me up. But that was really.
I bet that was. Yeah, and don't have trouble standing up and talking in front of crowds or whatever, but just somebody that well-known, right?
Oh, yeah, you have all of them and also, and the funny part is I was extremely shy as a child. If the company came, I ran and hid under a van. I hid in a closet, that kind of thing. And when I was in high school, and I had a really good ag teacher, and I have him to thank for being where I am today. He literally told me, he said, Dickinson, you're on the parliamentary senior team. And he didn't talk back to me. The hell on earth, I can't get up and talk in front of people. And I went up to him quietly afterwards. I said, he says, no, you have a good vocabulary. I need you on there. And I went home and told my parents, and they laughed. They said, you're going to get up in front of people.
They didn't think it was going to happen either.
No. But that gave me he gave me enough self-confidence. And also, and I have judging livestock. I actually won a few awards doing that. And I didn't know if I could stand there and say,
Right.
Sir, I placed this class, blah, blah, and
Man. Yeah, FFA is such a great organization.
Oh, it is. I can't say enough good stuff about it.
Yeah, one of there's a young man who worked here, and he's gone off to college now, but he was FFA president here at the high school, and he was running for a state office, and all of that. And he came on Trail Talk last year, and we just talked about FFA and just all the great things that organization, gave him. All the tools.
You got it. That's it exactly. It gives you tools for those kids to use and move forward.
Yeah, love FFA. So the venue, I guess we could call it a venue that you have there at your place now. Kind of what prompted you to have that idea for hosting?
When we were looking at places, I had told my husband, I would really like it if we have a place where we can have people come over and have what's popular now are what they call house concerts. And what happens is performers between big shows, you invite people to come over and they'll do a show, in your living room or out in your yard or that kind of thing. It's a very relaxed type deal. And it helps them with gas money and, place to stay, feed them dinner, this kind of thing, and a chance for them to sell CDs, books, etc.
Right.
And so those are very popular. And I thought, I hope we have a place where we can do that. Well, we have a really nice, big, air-conditioned, heated shop that I'm able to do this with. And I tried to start out and be a nonprofit. And then I found out that the laws have recently changed and you can't have two family members be on a nonprofit because it becomes a foundation, and then you must do the funding. So I had to back out of that and then talk to attorney and CPA, and they said, you know what, you've got to do an LLC.
Yeah.
This is the only way you can do this. So, which is not what I wanted, because I can help people, particularly where I am.
Right.
In between Amarillo and Oklahoma City, or Amarillo and they're doing shows in Fort Worth, Dallas, this kind of thing. And so 3 hours from Amarillo, which is not bad, and it gives them a chance to earn some more money, new fans. And the best part to me is exposing local people to stuff they've not heard before.
So do you, just, I mean, like, how many people can come?
Oh, it's, I probably got capacity for 100. I think the most I've had is close to 50.
Mhm. Wow, that's
It
a
just
nice.
takes
size.
a while, for word to spread and what's going on and that kind of thing. But it's been great. I've had some great donors. And it's funny, if they can't donate, what I do is I advertise in return.
Mhm.
And, this
Right.
is what the attorney said. They can write it off as advertising, since I advertise, like if you go to a rodeo and somebody's name's on the fence.
Right.
Same idea.
Uh-huh.
And so I've had some great people. And in fact, Jay's company also, they kicked
Mhm.
in. I was trying to get a good sound system. And so he knew that and he kicked in, and I've had some nice big donors that have helped with that.
Well, how fun, and what a great encouragement for
Yeah.
you. Okay, then this is supposed to take off.
Yeah.
This is supposed to happen
Yeah,
here.
and I was so pleased, Danny and Sheila Stegall could come up from Fletcher.
Uh-huh.
And Danny did a concert, he did kind of a cowboy gospel concert for us with, and Jay did poetry, and he brought up Steve Story, who is on Red Stegall's, show every week, brought him up to play fiddle on it. And but Danny helped with the sound system, setting it up, and he's been a great encourager on keeping this going. So I've really been blessed, and Straw comes. He's only about 30 miles away.
Right, I knew he was up there somewhere, yeah.
So
Is it mostly local folks who come to?
some
attend?
is and some aren't. I have a couple of people who come from the other side of Oklahoma City. That, some of them are driving an hour and a half one way, 2 hours, some of them.
Yeah,
And then I have people that are real close right there that don't miss any. So, the support's been great.
do people like let you know in advance that they're coming, or their
Yeah,
tickets?
I actually set it, somebody will get a hold of me and say, hey, I've got in fact, a couple, they're not a couple, but they're performing together.
Right.
At the end of the month, are playing a private party for somebody in Gainesville, Texas, I believe. And last time he was here, he came up and played. And they're both really very, very talented young artists. But even within the genre, I have from old time cowboy music to contemporary to cowboy gospel. So, and it's still within that, but it's also, each performer is very unique.
Right, how long have you been?
I started last year doing some. I didn't, I took off for the winter, and this year I thought, I don't know if I'm gonna do anything in July and August because it's so darn hot.
Yeah.
And while we're air conditioned and stuff, people, I don't know if you really want to go out and leave the air conditioning.
Right, no, I mean, I think you're probably right, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and you just, I'm just curious, like, how do you know all of these performers? How do you know these?
That's the thing, and I'm so blessed because I've performed with for all these years. So I really know who are the top performers within them. This is the thing, and so I'm able to get the top ones like Jay.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Everybody that I've had there is very definitely within probably the top 10 of performance.
That is just so cool, and often little, Northern Caddo County.
Yeah.
I mean, that is just such a fun thing. I was gonna ask you, I said earlier, and then you came to Oklahoma, but what made you pick Oklahoma?
We were looking around Texas, Oklahoma, that kind of thing. One reason, politics in New Mexico, frankly. Didn't care at all for what was going on there. And they also were becoming very anti-ag with the governor, that when she was reelected and stuff. And we were starting to have border issues where we were. And there were just too many thing saying, time to go,
Yeah, yeah.
time to go. And that was, our thought was Texas or Oklahoma, that's where we'll feel at home.
Yeah,
And we came on this place, we looked at 3 or 4 others when we looked at this one. And I think as soon as we turned in the driveway, I turned to the realtor and I said, he's gonna want this one. I knew before we got up there, so.
so do your girls live close?
No, and I wish they did, Miss family. One daughter lives out of Ruidoso, New Mexico.
Okay.
She works in a bank and she and her husband run a ranch that's close to that darn fire going on right now. From a Texas owner, they run the ranch for him.
Oh, okay.
And the other daughter lives in southern Idaho, and her kids are in southern Idaho, but I also have grandchildren in several of them in Nevada.
Okay.
And Idaho's and one in Texas, grandchild.
Okay. Wow.
So I've got them spread out
You
everywhere.
do. You sure
But
do.
they're all pretty good about coming in when we all get together. There is a bunch of us.
Well, what fun. Do you guys ride horses together and things like that?
We do at times, and in fact, when our oldest granddaughter brought her kids last year, and they ride all the time. Her dad has a ranch in Nevada and all, but the kids wanted to ride, and I says, I may have to get the old horse out. And I said, we go over to the covered arena. It was kind of windy and all, and nobody'd been on him in 10 years. And I thought, well, I'm the littlest one. I'm gonna have to get on him. And it was really funny because he was so proud. He was like, yeah, I'm back with it again. And so I rode him around a little before I put the great grandkids on him.
Right.
And then it was so funny, every time my husband, after this, would load his horse in the trailer, if you left the door open too long, he would jump in. He was going.
He missed it.
I'm going, yeah.
Oh, that's so funny. What a great story. Well, Deana, what do you miss the old life of, being far away and
I wondered when we moved to Oklahoma where I can see neighbors.
Uh-huh.
Our ranch in New Mexico, closest neighbor was 4 miles. In Nevada, it was 13 miles. And I thought, boy, am I gonna have a hard time? I can hear cars. And we don't have any really close neighbors.
Yeah,
It's probably a quarter mile
yeah.
to a neighbor.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna guess. I'm not good at distances, but, and it hasn't. There's enough, and I have really good views. It's just rolling hills and cows, so I feel pretty much at home.
I mean, listen, I love Oklahoma. I love the rolling hills.
It's so
and-
beautiful, and I think a lot of people are not aware of that. I think it's every time we take we go somewhere, my husband and I comment, this is so pretty. How blessed are we? So.
Last night I drove over to Carnegie
Yeah,
and drove along Lake Watonka, but even after you get past there, and you're back on the highway heading north, I mean, it's just so pretty. You can see for miles. That's my mom and dad's house is up on a hill, and growing up, I could see Mount Scott, from our front porch.
Yeah.
And I just have always loved how far you can see. The song On a Clear Day You Can See Forever. I've always thought, boy, they nailed those lyrics, and I don't know, it's just a beautiful place.
It is, and it was real funny, love and history, genealogy kind of goes hand in hand.
Right.
When you're doing this. And then it was so funny to find where I had ancestors buried in Oklahoma. I knew I had a great uncle that moved here, but I didn't know about all the rest of them.
Wow.
And so that was really interesting. I'm like, I didn't know they moved and they all lived and died up here. I did
Wow.
not know that.
That is something.
Yeah.
So you just came back to a family you didn't even realize.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Wow.
it.
Wow. Well, I wonder, would you do another poem for us?
Sure.
While you're here?
Any certain mood you want?
Oh, no, I think you know better than me what you've got in there.
Okay.
I think I love it that you.
Trying to think what would be a good one. That's a real popular one. since I did a serious one.
Mm-hmm.
Well, those are serious too. Maybe I haven't. This is a really old one.
Uh-huh.
Really, really, I hardly ever do it, so I'm gonna have to probably look at it. So
Well, that's
do it.
quite all right. Nobody is judging on that for sure.
I'll
Nobody.
have it, so if I lose my place, I'll find it.
Perfect, perfect.
This one is, and like most of my poetry, there's that, usually it's based on something that happened, and this literally happened to me on the ranch in Nevada, and it's called The Hired Hand. We made a call to town to have some help sent down. Horses and us were wore out. I even walked like I had gout. They said they'd send a gal out. She knew what riding was all about. We agreed it'd be all right, and she'd arrive that night. Well, after supper, I thought I heard a truck come in, and I went to check the bunkhouse again. I was surprised to find her there. It did kind of give me a scare. Well, she was experienced all right, and I was grateful for the bad light. She looked so old and poor, standing in that bunkhouse door. Her battered hat had a hole in the crown, strands of dirty hair hung down over a face lined with dust and crud that water would have turned to mud. There was a tattered scarf round her neck. Her coat looked like she'd been in a wreck. One sleeve was tore halfway loose, where feathers floated in search of the goose. Just as I was about to voice my doubts, I let out a strangled shout. Recognition had come to me, and I tried to gather some dignity. For all my fears had come true. There wasn't a thing that I could do but slam that bunkhouse door and not look in that dang mirror anymore.
Oh, that is good. Oh, what a funny one.
And that
really did happen.
When you live in Nevada and you gotta have help on a short notice, you go into Capriola's, it's big saddle shop and stuff, and you pin up, you need help, or you call and say, hey, who's standing around? We need help tomorrow, or whatever the case is.
Mhm.
And so they had said they'd send somebody out, and when you open that old cabin door, there's a mirror directly across.
That is so great. What a funny thing. And it's great to capture that story in this poem, and that helps you remember that also.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's.
You probably have written your family history.
Some
poems.
and some, bits and pieces perhaps.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, it's certain things that you capture and all. And the thing, there was a really good woman that was a cowboy poet. Her name was Sue Wallace. And Sue was, I don't know how really to describe her, very much dominant and no filters really.
Mhm.
She was descended from the Greenos, the old rodeo women, the Greeno girls, all bronc riders, and growing up with a grandmother who was very proper, and she had wild ones here, and so her poetry was really great.
Mhm.
And she made a remark. She says, I'm writing poems I didn't think I'd ever do a poem. And sometimes, and I've done the same thing. I've written some and thought, well, that's a private type thing, and then I've ended up doing some
Mhm.
that and some people, you'll have some old timers that are like, well, I don't know if those ought to be told or not. And I'm watching everything evolve.
Mhm.
I've been in it long enough that I am watching the evolution of it. And for a while, they weren't doing very many classic cowboy poetry sessions, and they were going back, and I'm really glad, and I've brought that up at several gatherings. We need to keep these old ones going.
Mhm. So do you see
interest in young people?
More in
In-
music, which I don't blame them. If I could
Right.
sing, I would definitely be
Right.
doing
Yeah,
it.
I'm with you on that. Yeah.
But there are some, I know of a couple of young men that are doing really well, and I'm really glad they're doing it. Now, this year at Elko is gonna be kind of neat. It's the 40th reunion,
Ah,
and they are bringing back some of the people who recited as children.
wow,
And
that's
my
cool.
daughters will be two of them.
Oh.
And so that's pretty neat
That-
that they're
wow.
gonna bring those back.
Mhm. That sounds, what a great time. What
Yeah.
a great time for those
Yeah.
young people and for the art itself. You
Yes,
know, the art of cowboy poetry. What a great thing to celebrate and what a great way to celebrate it.
yeah, it
You
is.
know, that's a wonderful thing. Well, it is an art form that I hope stays around.
Me too.
Whatever, things need to go with the flow,
Yeah,
you know,
To
like.
keep
you
it
said-
alive.
Exactly. If things need to change a little bit to keep that, the important thing is keeping the culture and the
Yes.
history of that culture
Yeah.
alive.
It is. It really is. And, you know, sometimes they'll have what they call open mic sessions
Mhm.
where, you know, you're not on the program, you're not a paid performer, and people will come up. And sometimes you got some really good ones. And then you have some other ones, and it's like, you need to go back. And what they're doing as what they think of as cowboy poetry is not.
Mm,
It's so far out there and way,
mhm,
it is not.
mhm.
But what I love particularly with the old poetry, and some of Jay's a great example, he's carrying on using the right words, the so-called lingo,
Mhm.
and representing in his poetry, you're picturing the right, like we were talking about, values, behaviors, attitudes, all of this, and capturing that and, you know, preserving it.
Right.
And
Right.
I think that's so important.
Oh, for sure. I totally agree. In fact, the last time I talked to Jay on Trail Talk, that was one of the things, you know, as the poet laureate,
Yes,
he's had a lot of opportunities to teach or to go into schools and, you know, do things for younger crowds.
yeah,
A lot of people who may not have heard or would ever go to an event and hear someone tell a poem about cowboy life, but, you know, he gets a captive audience. And
Yes.
so I think that that's a great way for him to use his platform, you know, and to do that.
one thing that I was really shocked at, we had not lived here very long, and I was looking for stalls to install in a barn. And I saw, look right here in Bigger, somebody's got some, let's go look at it. Called them, went up there, and young, early 30s, barely in the 30s.
Mhm.
And he's asked me, he says, are you a cowboy poet? And I said, yeah. He goes, I have to tell you something. He says, I love it. I said, really? And he said, I learned to read. I would never have learned to have read if it wasn't for it. I had no interest in school. I didn't want to read, had no interest, just
Mhm.
all of this. He said, one day the teacher read a cowboy poem. And he was a ranch kid and always just thinking about being back out with the horses and blah, blah.
Mhm.
And he said, I perked up, said, now that, I want to read more.
Mhm.
So I learned to read because of that.
Wow.
And that really touched me.
Oh, my
I thought,
goodness.
oh, yeah.
What a great
Yeah.
story. Good on that teacher, you know?
Yes.
That's, I love that. That is a great example of, there's something for everyone. There's something to inspire everyone
Yeah.
to learn to read. There's something that's going to interest them. That is awesome. Well, Deanna, I hope that you just continue to have a long and wonderful time here in
Oh,
Oklahoma.
I'm sure we will.
I am so glad that you're here. It's such a joy to meet you and I just feel like my brain, I'm thinking about so many things. But I think that when you said earlier, the lady that you wrote that poem for her family, what was her first name?
Georgie.
Georgie. When you said she insisted that she was a cowboy.
Yeah.
I think that that embodies everything that cowboy poetry is about, because it is, the cowboy is an iconic, it's an icon, not
Yeah.
iconic, and a cowboy is an icon, and it represents so much, and you don't have to be a cowgirl or whatever.
Yeah.
And for her to say that, whenever you said that, that really struck me, and I feel like that's really what all of this is about, and for the art form that you.
Yeah, it's not the hats and the fringe
No.
and the sequins.
No.
It's, you know, the gritty, down to earth,
Mm-hmm.
hard work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so I really love that. Well, I hope that maybe another time you can come back and we can
I'd love
continue
to.
our
This is
conversation.
fun.
It's,
And I just love your museum.
oh, well, thank you. I always say it's the best place in the world to work.
Yeah, when the kids visit, we gotta bring them.
Yes, for
Yeah.
sure. That would be so fun. You'll have to let me know.
I
You'll have to
will.
let me know.
I will.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. You guys, we're going, what is your website?
Deana Dickinson McCall.com and Facebook, Deana Dickinson McCall author.
Author, yeah, that's right,
Yeah.
yeah. We'll put that information in the comments, for this post. And, I just, I can't wait to hear all the fun things that are going on. Now, every time I see Jay, I'm gonna say, hey, what's going on with Deana?
Yeah, he'll probably be, boy, I wish I hadn't recommended.
No. I'm following you on Facebook, so all of your little promotional things about this event you're having and all that that's always coming
If you
up.
have a
So
chance to listen to them, look them up, Google
I will do
them.
that.
And I think you'll be like, oh, because I think it'll be something, because they're younger, it's
Mhm.
gonna be a different from what, you know, you may have heard yourself.
Right, exactly. Well, that sounds really fun. Well, when we sign off, we always say happy trails together. So, yeah, so you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you guys so much for watching today. We'll
Thank
see you
you.
very soon. Happy trails.
Happy trails.